Zara, Assalamualaikum, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Not too bad.
Good to see you.
This is Natasha. She's with National Radio, CBC, so on. Where is Shahid? Shahid!
Shai should be here.
Anwar Umar is introducing me to some of his closest childhood friends at a picnic just outside of Toronto. Do you know a lot of the people that are here?
It was amazing. Sheila kept saying to me, is there anybody you don't know? So I said, well, I know because being very involved in the community.
He's been in Canada since 1972, but he was born and brought up in Uganda. Like tens of thousands of other Asian Ugandans, Anwar was kicked out of his native country by the dictator Idi Amin. Many of those expelled Ugandans found their way to Canada.
So I was seeing a lot of people after many years
All the golden
from that
memories of
angle.
your childhood. Beautiful memories of Kampala, Jinja, Bale, Iganga, Kaliro, Kamuli, Namasagale, Gulu, Lira, Saroti, you name it, all parts of Uganda are there. And I am Naresh Bajitia welcoming you all to this Uganda reunion picnic.
And today, 900 Asian Ugandans are getting together 38 years after their exodus. Every week, we bring you a story of an escape that starts anywhere in the world, but always ends in Canada. My name is Natasha Fatah, and this is Promised Land. Today, Escape from Uganda. Anwar Umar's family came to Uganda from India in the late 1800s. They were part of the wave of Indians who came to build the railway in British East Africa. A lot of them stayed after the railway was completed, and many of them became merchants and bankers. In Uganda, they were referred to as the Asians. For decades, these families lived peacefully in East Africa. But as the Asian minority continued to thrive, a lot of black Ugandans started to resent them. In 1971, an army commander named Idi Amin took power in a military coup. At first, many of the Asian Ugandans welcomed the coup, but Amin soon began spreading anti-Asian propaganda.
Their main interest has been to exploit the economy of Uganda Africans.
He called them bloodsuckers. He said they were milking the wealth of black Ugandans. And then suddenly, on August 4th, 1972, President Amin announced that all Asian Ugandans had to leave the country, and they had to be out in 90 days.
I dream that if you take decision now and remove the whole non-citizens who are being milking the economy of Uganda, this is the only chance Uganda will get. You must take immediate actions. I left the place without breakfast and I went and declared economic war.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the news?
Yes, I was at college actually. I had just come out of my class when my roommate, who had that particular period off, he was in his room and he just had the radio on, and he was a South Asian as well. And he told me this.
And how did you feel when you realized
we were shocked.
what was going on?
To me, that was my country. I was born there, so was my mother. And I was working towards my teacher's degree, and I was almost done, and I was hoping that I would use my education to help the country itself. So I had no inclination of leaving that place because it was a beautiful place. We had a good life, very, very good life. So there was no thought of leaving the country. So when that came, it was a real shock.
I was in my hometown of Jinja when we heard this announcement that he's giving us 90 days to get out. Anybody who was not black African was not a Ugandan, so get out.
I used to sing for a band at the time, and we had just played a function in Kampala. And we had gone to the Grand Hotel to have breakfast that morning, and we heard this news that Amin had made this statement at a school that at the time he called it all British Asians had to leave the country within 90 days. Our first reaction was, this is a joke.
We were in a wedding party in Kampala.
What was the reaction at the party?
The reaction then was normal because we thought he's just bluffing. But it came true. Yeah, it came true. As the days passed, we took him seriously.
The whole world was talking around us, all the neighbors, everybody phoning each other. Did you hear? Did you hear?
Well, it was a shocker in the sense that somebody is coming to tell you that get out of your mother country. And I had no other country to look forward to. This is where I was born. This is where I was brought up. This is where I was going to have my rest of my life. And it's a wonderful country. And I couldn't believe it.
I was in a town called Ambale. We had gone there for a business trip. So it was on the radio that we heard that Idi Amin had a dream and he said all the Asians have to leave. I personally, being young at that age, thought, no, it's not going to happen. I mean, this guy is definitely not going to happen. And obviously some Western country would definitely say, hey, you can't do that, But I guess being young and naive, thought, he's just taking for the sake of talking, right? But hey, reality was it did happen.
It became very clear, very quickly, Amin was not joking. The so-called Asians would have to leave, but even that was complicated. Because when Uganda became independent in 1962, the Asians were given a choice. They could retain their British citizenship or become Ugandan, officially. Half of the Asians chose to keep their British passports. So in 1972, Amin promised that if any Asian could prove their Ugandan citizenship, they could stay. And Anwar wanted to stay.
After this particular pronouncement was made, there was a process of verifying your citizenship. Now they said, okay, if you can really confirm that you're a real Ugandan, we'll let you stay. You had to take your documents and so on. And you had to line up at this one location. And this was something that I would wish on no one. We had to stand in line for 3 to 4 days continuously to reach the front counter. So we were taking turns, sleeping, friends standing in your place so you could take a nap and so on. So many of us, though we were born there, by the time we got there, they said, sorry, you're not a Ugandan, you are a stateless person.
We were told to take our passports to one central location on Kampala Street and register our passports that said we are genuine Ugandans. So when we went and registered our passports, they were snatched away from us, and we were given an identity card. And then a few days later, it was announced that Asians who are controlling the businesses, they have to go up north somewhere in the desert, in a place where there are only trees there and jungle, and we have to start all over again. So that really scared us, and that was one of the reasons we left.
So I went and I verified my passport. Everything was okay. Everybody gave me a green signal, no problem. And then people came and knocked at our door, military people, and they came and they asked me for my ID. So I gave my ID, my passport, and they took away my passport. They said, you have no passport now. And then they showed me a gun, and they said, give me your money. And I didn't have money, so they fired a shot, and they went around my house. They took away everything, and he said, we are coming back tomorrow. You are not gone, you are dead.
So Amin's promises were lies. In the end, it didn't matter what your citizenship was. If you were Asian, you were out. Nearly 75,000 people would have to go, and they'd have to leave almost everything behind. They were each allowed to take only one suitcase with them. But many of the soldiers in Amin's army started to harass and rob the Asians even as they were preparing to leave. Anwar explains.
The army, when we think of armies, we think of disciplined, educated people. Unfortunately, once he got into power, he recruited a lot from his own tribe. And most of them were uneducated, really many criminals in there. And once those guys had guns in their hand, they were just knocking on Asians' doors in the evening. They would just show up at your door, come in and take whatever they wanted, beat you up. And this was a daily occurrence in the evening. So you were never sure when some of those guys would just show up at your door. And there was no recourse because the police was frightened of the army. So there was no point taking your case to anybody.
They come at night, they want to rob you. Say, come on the gunpoint. Army comes and says, okay, we need this, we need this. These are all small soldiers. They come with a gun. And the big officers, I don't think they know anything about it, what is happening. But they were everywhere. If you're not careful, you're robbed.
One day, my husband and my father-in-law just left the house. As soon as they left, the doorbell rang, My mother-in-law kept on telling the servant, don't open the door, don't open the door. And they started knocking. And I called my husband that these guys are here with machine gun. So he went to the police station and told them that somebody is harassing my house. The police car came and he asked the man, who are you? What are you doing? He said, who are you to ask us? He just went back. And my father-in-law, so he went to this other person and he said, they are harassing the family, the ladies. So the man, he sent about 5 military trucks, and all these military people. And he came to the door. He talked in Swahili. He says, please open the door. Nobody will hurt you. And these people just want to search your house. We opened the door and the military was all over the house. They searched everywhere. Then he took me in the little room where we used to keep our grains. And he put his hand all over me. He says, I'm coming tonight to take you. Tears running down. I didn't say anything. And my father-in-law, he said, we are going out of this place tomorrow.
Many were robbed, many were assaulted, and some were killed, including one of Anwar's best friends.
I had a very close friend. He organized tours for hunting safaris and so on. He was picked up one evening and thrown into the trunk of his car. He owned a Mercedes. That's all they wanted was, and I wish they had just taken that. But he disappeared when the call came out that nobody had seen him for a day or two, so we started to look around. Anyways, in our search, finally they discovered some bodies, and his was one of them. They had just shot him. They found the bullet-ridden body of my friend, and that was sort of very close to me.
Now many of the Asians wanted to leave, as soon as possible, but it wasn't obvious where they could go. Anwar knew he was stateless, but he found a way to get papers for some members of his family.
I managed to find my mom's old British protectorate passport, and again had to go and stand in the line at the British embassy. Took 2 days, but I managed to get in, and they managed to take that passport, the information from them, and issue a British passport. And since my brother was under 21, he could go on that particular passport. So before I could leave the country, they were able to leave and go to England. At that point, I was still struggling to find a place that would take me.
British passport holders were welcome to go to England, legally, but they were unwelcome in other ways. Across the UK, street demonstrators protested the arrival of the displaced Asians.
The strongest opposition to the expulsion is in Britain, where most of the Asians are expected to go. There's even a touch of racism in this.
British crowds chanted, "We don't want the Asians." But Canada provided some relief. Many of the Asian Ugandans were Muslim Ismailis, and the leader of that community is the Aga Khan. He was a personal friend of Pierre Trudeau, and he appealed to the Prime Minister to help.
The Canadian government extended a level of cooperation, understanding, help that was absolutely remarkable.
So despite the anti-immigrant backlash in this country, Trudeau agreed to accept nearly 5,000 refugees.
But I think the general principle of Canada helping people in need and distress is accepted by all Canadians.
And that meant that after Britain, Canada took in the highest number of Asian Ugandans. So Anwar applied to come to Canada. He went through another long lineup at the embassy. When he got in, he was given a number, and he was told to expect a call to book an official interview.
That, by the way, too, was a hair-raising experience in itself. After I applied, my number would not come up for an interview. And, people who had applied after me, I would meet them on the street. He said, "Oh, I'm leaving for Canada tomorrow." And I said, what's happening here? Finally, I found out there was a person who I knew was helping the Canadian government at the time processing the papers. So I approached her. I went to her place in the night and said, I had applied. This is my number. I'm not sure what had happened. She was very kind enough to look through the pile and found that my application had ended up at the bottom of the pile. She managed to put it on top, and I think it was the 20th or the 19th of October when I got the interview and instantly accepted.
Anwar would go to Canada, and the rest of his family would head to England. It was a situation that many of the Asians now found themselves in. Their families were suddenly and unwillingly divided.
Two of my sisters had already left. One had gone to Malta and one had gone to India. I decided that since my best friends were coming to Canada, I was going to come to Canada.
My husband got permission to go to England with his parents because we lived with them. And my brother-in-law, they said no. So they took him into Canada.
My brothers, they went to England and I went to America.
So we went to Netherlands and our family was all in England. So we thought they'll accept us in England, but being so close, they did not accept us. They said, you are a refugee, you have no status.
And I sent my wife to Bangalore and my parents. I came to Canada because my sister is here.
That day was the saddest day of my life because we were all lined up with our bags and whatnot. And my sister was right in front of me. She was going to a different country. She was going to Canada. And Canada wouldn't take me. And I was going to England. But we all boarded the same bus to travel. And my sister got really hysteric. So hysteric that I had to slap her. I actually had to slap her to calm her down. It was that bad, She couldn't accept the fact that she actually has to leave the country. And not only that, we were all going to be separated from there. That particular day, we'll never forget that. Never forget that.
Families were torn apart, including Anwar's. He'd sent his mother and brother to England, and he was on his way to Canada. A week before the deadline to leave, he headed out for the airport. But even that wouldn't be simple.
See, the danger was you didn't want to let anybody know that you were leaving. Because if the word got out to the army or somebody spilled the beans on you, then, they could come and harass you, beat you up, whatever. So everybody who was leaving very quietly. They would just disappear. You see them, they won't even tell you, your neighbors. Next day you see they're gone.
The trip to the airport was a harrowing one.
On the 22nd, what I did was I just left my house. I left my car, my door, just as it was, took nothing out of it, just one small suitcase, because we were only allowed to take one suitcase out. And I went and stayed in a hotel downtown Kampala. And what the Canadian government had done was they had organized a bus to run from Kampala to where the airport was. Because what was happening was when people were leaving on their own, on the track from Kampala to Entebbe, they were being stopped at numerous roadblocks by the army, unnecessarily, harassed again, if they were making them open their suitcase, things being taken off.
And we packed just 2 cases, not very much, just essentials, underclothes, and as we stopped at every point, there was a checkpoint. The army fellows came in, told us to open up our suitcase, and then they said, oh, this will be nice for my daughter, this will be nice for my mother, and whatever. And so by the time we reached, whatever, the 2 suitcases, whatever contents we had, fitted in half a suitcase, if at all. And they took all the money what we had.
I had to basically go from my hometown to Entebbe airport, which is roughly about 80 miles. In a normal circumstances, I would be there probably within 1.5 to 2 hours traveling by car. That day, it took me 8.5 hours to reach the airport, because every few miles there was an army checkpoint, and they were checking my bags. They were checking, and anything they found of value, they would take it, and I had no way of saying, hey, that's mine. I couldn't, because I was pointed with a gun in my face and say, we are taking it, and there's no ifs and buts. So the way Ugandan government has kicked us out was the shirt, the clothes you were wearing, anything excess and from there, they would take it away.
Anwar was on that Canadian bus. But even after arriving at the airport, the deportees and their few belongings weren't safe. To many of the Asian women, the jewelry they brought with them held both a sentimental and a religious significance, but it also had a material value.
The saddest part that I saw was where the Asian women who were being hassled and their jewelry being taken away from them. There was one lady who had just got married, so she was completely decked in her jewelry that was being pulled off her, and just crying and screaming and shouting, but there was nothing you could do. People's things being scattered all over the place. I mean, we had already gone through all this turmoil and heartache and leaving everything behind, and then going through, just at the last stage of when we were leaving the country, going through the same process again, last of your belongings, I would say, being snatched from you.
It was a chaos. It was chaos. Like you can imagine, people haven't eaten food for, let's say, a month or 2 months, and then there's just a little bit food, how people would rush to it, Older people, younger people. There was nothing, it wasn't like an organized exodus. People were rushing to get out, people were scared, people were dropping stuff here and there, taking whatever they could. I guess they were looking for their loved ones, and loved ones had left, and, there was crime. I mean, it was chaos. It was a huge, huge chaos.
At Entebbe, they would strip everybody. They were looking for gold, and a lot of the Asians were hiding gold because that was the only thing they could take with them.
A lot of people were crying, a lot of old people were upset because things were being stolen from their bags and they couldn't say nothing.
And we were young, so people gave us money, as little kids. And what they did was, when we came to the airport, they just said, let's check you, And somebody said, why take money from little kids? But they said, no. I had about 500 shillings or something like that people gave. They took it away from us and they just let us go without nothing.
A military guy recognized who we were and he started beating me up. And so I asked him, why would you really beat me up? What are you going to get out of that? So he says, oh, you're trying to bribe me? I said, I just asked you a question. Then after 2 minutes he says, how much money can you give me? So I said, how much do you want? So I emptied my pocket and gave him what I had, and he was pretty happy and let me go.
I was at the customs clearing, helping some people to clear their stuff. One of the officers came and talked to me, said, what do you have? I said, oh, this is belonging to Mrs. X. And it's her goods. They open up, and there were some utensils. So army didn't like that utensils. They said, why are you taking these things? So they get mad and hit me and kicked the lady. They kicked her very good at the back and everything. She still suffers.
The custom was really, they searched you all over, complete. And they took away my mother-in-law's jewelry, everything. And my father-in-law just burst out crying. He said, look at this. God, what are you doing? That is the thing I can never forget. Even up to this day, you remember that? And it's terrible.
Whilst we were there at Entebbe Airport, waiting for the aircraft, the president came there and waved to everybody.
Amin was there, President Amin?
Yeah, he came at the airport on the last day. Yeah, just goodbye to everybody.
Even after they boarded the plane, many of the reluctant exiles didn't feel the danger was over.
When the plane finally left the airport, we were still frightened that they may shoot us down. But when it was in the air, then we relaxed and said, thank God, we are safe.
Once we got out of Uganda airspace, we had a party on the plane. And we partied all the way.
Basically, I would say we were glad to once on the tarmac and get on the plane. I said, thank God, we are safe. We are going now.
They were out of Uganda, but they'd left so much behind.
I have left behind a lot of memories and a lot of my childhood memories that I can never get back.
Really, you want to know? My wedding photos. Yeah, I wish I could have those albums because it was only 1 year after I got married. If I have to redo it again, I'll make sure I take those things first.
What did I leave behind? I left behind the country. I left behind memories that are so strongly etched in my mind. To me, it's like yesterday. I can remember every little thing, every little detail. I was third generation in Africa. The Uganda government paid for my entire university education, my undergrad and my postgrad, and 6 weeks after I graduated, I was kicked out. So I left the country behind. And interestingly enough, I have never been back.
On October 23, 1972, Anwar arrived in Canada.
We ended up in Montreal at the army barracks is there. That's where they were processing all the incoming Ugandans and then being distributed across the country. And the process, the criteria they had used was, when my turn came, they asked me if I wanted to go to a particular place because some people had already found out that their friends had gone to Toronto or Vancouver or so on. And I had no such links, so I said anywhere would be good. And so there was 4 of us actually were sent to Perth, Ontario, not too far from Ottawa.
It's been 38 years since Anwar Umar left Uganda, and he has never gone back. He and thousands of other Asian Ugandans have settled in Canada and thrived in their new home. But at this reunion picnic, seeing so many old friends from his childhood, Anwar knows that Uganda will always be a part of him.
He's my childhood friend. We grew up together, like my brother. Just like that was how the relationships were. Played a lot of cricket together when we were, and we reconnected many years ago when they moved to the US and I moved here.
Promised Land is produced by Mark Ulster and me. Dagna Pilashkevich is our associate producer. Special thanks this week to Dean Plus. I'm Natasha Fatah. Thanks for listening.